This is my least favorite part of what I have to do. Make super serious videos that ultimately do have politics involved. Because I don't like tying politics to my page. I want my page to be open for everyone. I want everyone who struggles with mental health, mental illness, or knows someone who struggles with mental health or mental illness to be able to come to my page and learn something. And so I don't usually talk about politics. I try to avoid talking about religion. But today we have to talk about gun violence and mental health. After the most recent school shooting in Texas, you may have seen that the governor of Texas did what always happens when there's a mass shooting and immediately pointed the finger at mental health and mental illness. This is something that mental health advocates, such as myself, are exhausted of talking about. And I'm not here to advocate for taking guns away from everyone. I live in Wisconsin. I know plenty of people who use guns and use them safely. The gun debate can happen outside of this page. I want to talk about why we keep blaming hate and violence on mental illness, so we can stop using it as an excuse to avoid having the uncomfortable conversations that we need to have. One of the most frustrating things about people who constantly blame mental illness for these types of incidents, these are the same people who don't want universal health care and want to cut funding for mental health. Before I get into the things I want to talk about, let's say that is true. Let's make up a statistic and say 100% of mass shootings have been committed by mentally ill people. Then why are we not funding mental health care? If this is really about mental illness, why are we not making sure that people with mental illness are able to get the care they need and the medication they need? But what this conversation really comes down to is we need to stop calling violence and hate a mental illness. 1 in 5 Americans live with a mental illness. And if everyone who had a mental illness was out doing things like this, then we would be hearing about these events at an even higher frequency than what we already do. Before anything is learned about the people committing these crimes, the news and politicians will always say it was mental illness related. It was mental health related. There are already plenty of articles that support the fact that people with mental illness are way more likely to be the victim of violent crime than to commit violent crime. The reason there's such a terrible stigma surrounding mental illness is because anytime there's an incident like this, the news automatically starts by saying this person was mentally ill. Politicians want to say this person, and the danger in doing that is that people who do live with a severe mental illness, we see that and we're terrified for what that means for our community. Because I am friends with so many mental health advocates, none of which have displayed violence, none of which have hurt anyone around them. My own mother has schizoaffective disorder. And despite her being a single mother and raising me alone, I was never afraid to be around her. The only time I was even a little nervous was when I finally started learning about schizophrenia in high school. Because anytime you Google schizophrenia, anytime you look up a news article about schizophrenia, the only thing you can find are people who committed terrible acts and then were categorized as mentally ill. In the terms of just mass shootings, studies have shown that people with mental illness make up roughly 25% of that statistic. Now keep in mind there are roughly 14 million people in the United States that are diagnosed with a serious mental illness like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. That's a very small portion of the rates of gun violence in this country. According to the professor of psychiatry at the Yale School for Medicine, even if you were to do everything possible to eliminate mental illness, you'd only be addressing about 3% of the violence that happens in this country. The dangerous thing about continuing to act like mental illness is the cause for violence is going to be the increased stigma and fear created around certain mental illnesses. I'm terrified as a person with schizophrenia, knowing how schizophrenia is already perceived by by people. If we continue to push this message that people with mental illness are solely responsible for mass violence, which studies have proven time and time again to not be true, all we're doing is making it more difficult for those people living with mental illness. There are mentally ill people all over the world. 1% of America has schizophrenia. Out of the world's population, it's roughly the same. So why is it here in America we think people with mental illness are the only contributor to violence? No matter what side you're on the political spectrum, we all need to be having this conversation about violence, about mass shootings, because this is something that primarily happens in our country. If you're someone who believes wholeheartedly that mental illness is the cause for this violence, for the mass shootings, then you should be advocating for total mental health care reform. You should be advocating for people to be able to get the medication they need and the help they need if you think this is actually a problem. And like I said, the reason for me making this video is I don't think people actually believe this. Because if you believed it, you would care more about mental health care funding and resources, and you would care less about people simply trying to bring guns into the conversation. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Again, I apologize. These videos are not something I enjoy doing, but as a mental health advocate, it's something I have to talk about. Also, if you are a mental health advocate, I highly recommend checking out this shirt made by Schizophrenic NYC. It says, "I'm mentally ill and I don't kill." Because I know a lot of people are currently attending rallies, specifically fighting the idea that mental illness is consistently the cause for violent acts like this. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please be kind to each other in the comments. I know not everyone is going to agree on this topic, but we can have conversations about this topic without attacking each other personally. Thank you guys again so much for listening. My name is Cody Green. I'm mentally ill and I don't kill.